Hey, welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today we're going to give you a walkthrough on how to defeat the first boss in becoming a pharmacist in Australia, the CAOP exam. So, for those of you that don't know, the CAOP exam is the conversion exam test that you need to take if you are on the competency stream. But if by accident you are here looking for information on the knowledge stream, then that's fine too, as I am sure there's quite a lot of overlap. So, I've split this guide into 3 sections. The eligibility, because you can't sit the exam unless you're eligible for it. Section 2 on how to prepare for the exam. And Section 3, the format of the exam, where I'll give you tips and techniques on giving you the best chance of passing the exam. So grab a cup of tea, let's dive right in. So Section 1, eligibility. First of all, you're going to meet the APC, the Australian Pharmaceutical Council. This is an organisation that handles like the educational side of things. So in this case, they're there to make sure that you are up to the standard in order to practice in Australia. You don't really care about them. You just want to pass the exam. Unfortunately, these guys are like the bandit toll collectors on the bridge between you and becoming a fully qualified pharmacist in Australia. They will nickel and dime you every step of the way, but seriously, they're there to make sure you meet the criteria in order to practice safely in Australia. So unfortunately, you kind of got to suck it up and deal with it. So first lesson in the morning, costs. The overall process will set you back by a minimum of about 3,160 Australian dollars, which works out to be about £1,600. I say minimum because along the way, you'll encounter a couple costs like travel, buying resource materials, and any other extra training you feel you might need. So a breakdown of these costs are as follows. Got the eligibility check, got exam registration fee, and then you got to pay for a skills assessment outcome, which is the certificate to say that you passed. Oh, and a tiny caveat, if you fail the CAOP exam, that's bad, but then you got to pay an additional registration fee, which is again another £1,000, in order to have the privilege to resit it. And unfortunately, if you fail it twice, that's it. No more resits. You will then have to go down the knowledge stream. Right, so now onto the actual eligibility check itself. So pretty straightforward. When you go onto the APC website, you register, enter your details, and go through the whole application process of the eligibility. They'll ask you for a few documents, pretty standard. So things like your passport, driving license, proof of registration. Oh, they also ask you for your exam transcript and birth certificate as well. And if it's applicable, evidence of any name changes, or if you're getting an agent to act on your behalf on this process, then they will require an agent authorization form. Fortunately for me, I was getting married around the time I was sorting out all these applications, so I already had a lot of these forms ready and certified. So the only difficult documents I can foresee people getting are their birth certificates and exam transcripts. The easy one to do would be the exam transcripts. All you have to do is go and message your university. Hopefully there is a section where they address people making requests for their exam transcripts, and you can just make a request via that. You pay a small fee. I think I paid somewhere around £25. I can't remember, but it didn't work out to be too expensive. Okay, and then the other item, which is your birth certificate, that one can be a bit trickier, especially when a lot of us probably don't even have to look at it for most of our lives. So ask your mum and dad where they've stashed it since the day you were born. Otherwise, go onto the UK government website to request one. Now, I also appreciate that not all of you watching this will be from the UK. So, of course, you'd probably have to request it from the relevant government organisations from the place you were born. And if you so happened to be born in a non-English speaking country and your birth certificate is not in English, then you're going to need that translated. And not just by anyone, but have it translated by a certified NAATI translator. And once all that is done, you'll then be invited to finally sit the CAOP exam. Section 2. Preparing for the CAOP exam. So this is probably the main thing that a lot of you are here for. And to sit the CAOP exam, there's still a few more hurdles before exam day. So first of all, when to sit the exam. The APC hosts exam approximately 3 times a year, and you will need to register for these about a month or two before, or rather, they have a short registration window where you can register for the exam. And if you miss this registration window, tough luck, that's it, you're kind of stuck until your next one. So do check on the website for when they host these exams and their corresponding registration windows. Oh, and be realistic with the time you feel you need to properly revise for the exam, because the worst feeling is to rush in, fail it, and then paying another £1,000 unnecessarily because you're a bit overconfident. Okay, so all that's left to do now is to decide where you would like to sit the exam. It used to be that you have the option of sitting exam at home in front of your own computer or in person at a Pearson VUE Centre. However, as of January 2026, they changed the rules now and that you can only sit exam at a Pearson VUE Centre. So if you're in the UK, the only available locations at the moment are in London, Plymouth, Edinburgh, or Dublin if you're in Ireland. So do factor in the potential time that you need to take off and extra costs for travel, or maybe even you need to book a hotel and stay the night before. Okay, so the best piece of advice I can give you is to take the exam seriously. Treat it as though you're sitting a pre-reg all over again. Because essentially, in some way, it is. And as I mentioned before, it is an expensive test to fail. So do bear that in mind. And it's not just costs, but if you fail it a second time, you're going to have to go down to a knowledge stream, and then you'll just be paying in time and money. So you must really, really want to go to Australia at that point. So thankfully, the CAOP is an open book exam, and there are about 70 multiple choice questions, and you'll have about 2 hours to finish it. So that's about 1.5 minutes per question on average. So the APC recommends a couple reference materials to help you study. First one is the AMH, Australian Medicine Handbook. This is the Australian version of the BNF. Then you've got the APF, the Australian Pharmaceutical Formulary. Lastly, you've got the BNF, which is probably the best resource out there. But Sean, I hear you say, I've got the BNF. Where am I going to find APF and AMH? I need to save my last kidney in case I fail the CAOP exam. Don't you worry, because some good souls have managed to ship over copies of the AMH and the APF over to the UK, and I managed to pick mine up on Facebook Marketplace. Or in some cases, some people pick them up on eBay. So do have a browse. They aren't as cheap as you want them to be, but hopefully you can sell it off when you're done to the next pharmacist who wants to sit the exams. If it's any consolation to you, I only managed to obtain the APF, and that's all I had to work with along with the BNF. And I still managed to pass the first time. So make of that what you will. Personally, I found the BNF to have done most of the heavy lifting, and it is crucial that you get the most updated version as possible. I say at most within 2 years to give you the best chance, as anything older will have outdated information, as a lot of laws and regulations have changed since. Now, while the BNF is good for about 85 to 90% of the question, you may have already found that from sample papers that some of the questions are looking for some very Australian specific answers, which you won't necessarily find in the BNF. For example, like drugs that you've never heard of, that we don't see very commonly in the UK, but they ask it anyway. So thankfully, there are not a lot of these questions. So if you prepare as you would for a pre-reg exam, you should be fine. You might not get 100%, but I believe you should get enough to pass. The APC also provides you with a handy sample paper, just so you can get a nice feel of the flavor of type of questions and what the exam style is going to be like. And outside of a sample paper, there aren't really a lot of other past papers out there. I think I only managed to find one. Like I said, that was kind of enough for me. I also found a few websites where they say they provide exam practice and some past paper questions. Just be aware, some of these are scams. I didn't use any of them, but just be very careful when you're out there, because the APC don't endorse any of these third-party exam question providers. So my opinion of the CAOP exam was that it's very similar to a pre-reg exam. They'll ask you the typical questions covering all the major disease groups. And obviously there'll be a few odd ones here and there, so it's within the expectations. And in terms of difficulty, exams can vary quite a bit. This is more so to do with how they put the exam together rather than the type of questions that they ask. I'll explain more about this in section 3. At the very least, it will be very similar to a pre-reg exam with a few very niche questions that very few people will have revised and be prepared for. So, think stuff like in the last quarter of the PNF, very niche. Unfortunately, other than the sample papers, other past papers are very hard to come by, and I had to manage with past pre-reg papers in the UK. If you're tight on money, tight on time, then I recommend looking through those. However, I managed to find a couple more sample papers, and I put them in a bundle where you can download in the link in the video description. I find that the past pre-reg papers are rather adequate, and if nothing else, they'll be very good for practice on your calculations. Now, calculations! These are essentially 3 marks for those of you that have good grasp of maths. You've got to whack out your C1V1 equals C2V2 formulas again. And I don't think there's really anything that's more difficult than that. And don't forget units. Don't be mixing up your grams with your milligrams and your liters with your milliliters, okay? And of course, everyone would recommend that you study the AMH and the BNF in its entirety. But if you want a head start, obviously the main topics are the first 8 chapters of the BNF. Those form the bulk of all your disease groups, and they'll make up the majority of the paper. And also, don't neglect to brush up your knowledge on drugs with narrow therapeutic index. Things like lithium, digoxin, warfarin, etc. And one thing I noticed, and maybe you have too, is that Australians are culturally more keen on their supplements, and they will ask questions like those in the exam paper. So it will be advisable not to skip that section on all the nutrition and supplements in the BNF. And especially take note of drugs that causes electrolyte imbalances. There is a section at the back before the interactions where the BNF have all these tables listing out which drugs causes certain electrolyte imbalances. And that is always a good place to jump to, especially in the middle of the exam. So do bookmark that page. As you go through your practice exam papers, do try and get the most recent ones as you can. As I mentioned before, much older ones will have a lot of outdated questions and especially outdated answers, which will no longer be relevant. And worst case scenario, you're answering the questions wrong or you're just wasting your time. Right, section 3, onto the exam format. So there are 70 multiple choice questions, and not all of these questions are actually going to count. About 10%, so that's 7, are actually there for calibration and testing future questions out. So your test will essentially be out of 63 instead of 70. So a lot of people ask what kind of questions would come up. And unfortunately, this probably isn't the best question to ask. This is because no 2 people will be sitting the exact same paper on the day. And this is due to how the exam is put together. The exam will have 70 questions, which will be drawn from a large question bank covering all the various competencies as set out by the APC. However, not all exam questions are made equal. And this means on exam day, the difficulty can vary depending on what types of questions that you get. Already, I can hear you say how unfair this is, and the APC knows that. So to account for that, the APC will have varying pass marks depending on the type of questions that you receive. That means if you are given a bunch of easier questions, they expect you to score higher, and therefore your pass mark will be higher. Alternatively, if you got dealt a bunch of hard and very niche obscure questions, then they don't expect you to score as high, and therefore your pass mark is lower. The APC has a useful video visualizing this, which I will link below. It is also important to note that the APC has changed the exam format as of January 2026. Specifically, just for the calculation questions, they are no longer multiple choice, and they are now what are called fill-in-the-blank questions. This means you got to calculate the correct answer and write it into the answer box. Unfortunately, that means no more guessing. So don't be too hard on yourself if you feel that you come out of your exam thinking that you failed, because chances are you got dealt a bunch of hard and obscure questions. I thought I messed up big time on my attempt, but yet I still somehow managed to pass. I ascribe it to nothing short of a miracle. If you want to hear about my own personal experience of the CAOP exam, then subscribe and stick around for the next video. I hope this has been helpful, and if you have any more questions, feel free to write them down in the comment section below. So good luck on your Australian pharmacy journey, and I'll see you in the next video.